Flight attendant stabbed a black CEO in the neck. With a pen, didn't know his security team was 2 rows back. Darius King stood just a few feet from the gate entrance, his hand steady as he reached out to present his boarding pass. The hum of the airport around him was a familiar backdrop, a blend of distant announcements, rolling suitcases, and murmurs of impatient travelers. Yet all that seemed to fade as Trevor, the young gate agent, looked him up and down with a cold, dismissive gaze. "Sir," Trevor said, his voice flat but firm, "you can't board just yet. We have a dress code, and that chain you're wearing is against airline standards." Darius's brow furrowed slightly, though his tone remained calm. "Excuse me, I'm holding a first-class ticket. The chain is a personal item, a symbol of my heritage. It poses no threat. I just want to board." His words were measured, but the undercurrent of frustration was impossible to hide. Around them, a small crowd had gathered. Some passengers whispered among themselves, casting curious glances toward Darius. Others stared openly, their expressions ranging from confusion to judgment. Trevor shook his head, refusing to meet Darius's eyes. "It's not negotiable. You need to remove it, or you won't be allowed on." The dismissal felt sharp, an invisible barrier built not on policy, but on something else, something deeply unfair. Darius's heart tightened. He had faced challenges before, but this felt personal, unjust. Yet he knew that anger here would only serve Trevor's narrative. So, he held himself still, breathing through the sting of public scrutiny. He discreetly pulled out his phone with practiced ease, fingers tapping swiftly as he dialed. His mind was racing, not with panic, but with strategy. Behind the mask of calm was a man who had built an empire on his intellect and control. He was not about to be sidelined by a young man's narrow-mindedness. "Malik," he whispered low into the phone, "I'm at the gate, and there's a problem. The agent refuses to let me board because of my chain." His voice was steady but edged with determination. The terminal buzzed around him, a stark contrast to the tightening coil of tension inside. Nearby, travelers shifted impatiently, the weight of delay pressing on their shoulders. Yet Darius's focus remained unshaken. He glanced briefly at Trevor, who now avoided all eye contact, nervously tapping his pen against the counter. The atmosphere thickened with unspoken judgments, as if Darius's very presence unsettled the familiar flow of this elite space. This isn't just about boarding a plane, Darius thought, the words echoing quietly in his mind. It's about who gets to fly at all. Darius stood near the gate, his voice low but firm as he spoke into the phone, the words flowing steadily despite the storm of emotions beneath his calm exterior. Malik Rivers, his trusted legal advisor, was on the other end, his voice sharp and precise. "Darius, you have every right to board that flight. No policy justifies this kind of discrimination, especially not over something as trivial as a silver chain." Malik's reassurance was steady, but Darius knew this wasn't just a matter for the courts. It was bigger. Much bigger. Trevor, the young gate agent, continued to glare at Darius with thinly veiled hostility. His refusal to let Darius board had drawn a crowd, passengers shifting uneasily, some whispering in confusion, others openly skeptical. The murmur of voices blended into a low hum, filling the space with tension. Darius's eyes scanned the room, noting the subtle glances and judgmental stares. Yet he did not flinch. Instead, he pulled his phone from his pocket again and dialed another number. Before long, a man in a sharp supervisor's uniform approached Marcus. His posture was hesitant, eyes darting between Darius and Trevor. "Sir?" Marcus said cautiously, voice neutral but tinged with uncertainty. "I've heard there's an issue here. What can I do to help?" Darius fixed him with a steady gaze, voice calm but edged with resolve. "I was denied boarding by your agent for wearing a silver chain. He said it violates dress code, but there's no such policy. I'd like to speak with someone higher up, someone who understands the gravity of this." Marcus nodded slowly, but remained vague. "I'll see what I can do. We have protocols to follow." Darius's mind raced. He knew that a simple complaint or vague promises wouldn't cut it. He needed leverage. Reaching again into his contacts, Darius connected to Victor Hayes, a senior executive at Skyline Air, and a man who owed him a favor from a past business deal. Victor's voice crackled through the line, careful but concerned. Darius, I hear the situation. I'm pulling strings, but these things take time, Victor said. Stay calm. We'll get this sorted. The minutes stretched, each one weighing heavier on Darius as the flight clock ticked closer to closing time. Trevor, feeling the pressure, raised his voice slightly, accusing Darius of causing a scene. Sir, if you don't calm down, I'm going to have to ask you to step away. The crowd shifted uneasily, some backing Darius, others uneasy with the confrontation. The conflict sharpened. The stakes escalated with each passing second. Darius's objective was no longer just to board the plane. It was to expose the injustice happening right here in front of everyone. Behind the scenes, Victor was already mobilizing an internal review, sending urgent messages to key departments. Darius, meanwhile, drafted a public statement in his mind, preparing to shine a harsh light on the airline's culture of discrimination if they refused to act. The dramatic irony was thick in the air. Here was a powerful CEO, restrained and dignified, being held back by a low-level employee clinging to a biased rule. The airline was unwittingly setting itself up for a public relations disaster by insisting on Trevor's unjust stand. Darius's thoughts hardened with resolve. This was no simple boarding denial. It was a battle for respect and dignity, and he was ready to fight on all fronts. As the tension mounted, his phone vibrated again. Victor's message was clear. We're moving fast. Hold tight. Darius glanced around at the waiting passengers, then back to Trevor and Marcus. He raised his voice just enough for the crowd to hear. Sometimes the smallest chains can break the strongest wings, but sometimes they forge the fiercest fires. Just as the final boarding call echoed through the bustling terminal, the heavy footsteps of Victor Hayes approached with purpose, accompanied by two other executives whose faces carried a mix of concern and urgency. Their arrival sliced through the murmurs of the waiting crowd, turning heads and shifting the atmosphere from restless impatience to sharp focus. Victor's eyes locked onto Darius King, and for a brief moment, hesitation flickered across his expression. The airline's leadership had finally recognized the gravity of the situation, but this was no ordinary confrontation anymore. Victor cleared his throat, his voice steady but edged with unease. Mr. King, I'm here on behalf of Skyline Air's executive board. We understand the seriousness of what's happened and want to assure you that the airline is committed to addressing your concerns. He paused, glancing at the two men behind him who exchanged wary looks. We want to resolve this amicably. Darius met Victor's gaze without flinching, his posture calm but resolute. The weight of frustration and indignation had not broken his composure. Instead, it fueled the steel in his voice as he responded, Amicably means more than a mere apology. Trevor's actions aren't just inappropriate, they are discriminatory, and they've humiliated me in front of dozens of witnesses. I demand his immediate removal from duty, pending a full and transparent review. Victor's jaw tightened. That's a serious request. Removing an employee before a full investigation could have legal and financial implications for the company. I'm aware, Darius said, his tone firm. But this isn't just about Trevor. This incident reveals a deeper problem, a culture that allows this kind of behavior to persist unchecked. Skyline Air must publicly acknowledge the wrongful discrimination that occurred here today. More than that, you need to commit to a comprehensive overhaul of your policies and training programs. I expect a full, public statement from the airline. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Victor's face betrayed a flicker of doubt as he considered the magnitude of Darius's demands. The room seemed to shrink, the tension thickening like a storm about to break. Then, Darius delivered the blow that silenced them all. My company is already preparing a hostile bid to acquire Skyline Air's operating lease. This is not a threat. It is a statement of fact. The sudden revelation hung in the air, heavier than any spoken accusation. Victor's eyes widened, his confident demeanor wavering for the first time. The other two executives stiffened, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. None had anticipated that the man they had barred from boarding, the man they had dismissed with prejudice, was on the verge of becoming their new owner. Darius's voice lowered slightly, steady but carrying the weight of finality. You can choose to respond with accountability and change, or you can resist and face the consequences. The choice is yours. Meanwhile, Darius's legal team had been quietly mobilizing in the background, drafting a formal complaint to be filed with the aviation authorities should Skyline Air fail to meet his demands swiftly. The specter of legal action added another layer of pressure to the already fraught negotiations. Trevor, the gate agent who had ignited the entire ordeal, stood nearby, his earlier bravado replaced by a pale, tight-lipped expression. The weight of impending consequences bore down on him visibly. His shoulders slumped as realization set in that his defiance might cost him far more than a lost shift. Marcus, the nearby supervisor who had watched the situation unfold with increasing apprehension, shifted uncomfortably. His eyes darted between Darius and the executives, understanding fully now that this was more than an isolated incident. It was the tipping point that could reshape the airline's future. As the executives hastened away to consult on damage control, the airport terminal seemed to hold its breath. The murmurs of the crowd returned but carried a new note of anticipation, as if sensing that something monumental was unfolding just beyond their view. Then, breaking through the tense silence, Darius's phone vibrated sharply in his hand. He glanced down, reading the message with a small, knowing smile. His firm's board had just given unanimous approval for the acquisition bid. Months of careful preparation, strategic planning, and relentless determination were now coming to fruition. Darius looked up at the executives disappearing into the private offices beyond the terminal windows, and spoke softly, but with unshakable conviction. When you try to chain a man's spirit, you might just hand him the keys to your kingdom. The news broke like a thunderclap. Darius King, the very man who had been denied boarding on Skyline Air for wearing a silver chain, had just acquired the airline's operating lease. The headlines screamed the story of the year, a CEO humiliated by a gate agent turned buyer and reformer of a whole corporation. The world watched closely as Darius stepped into the spotlight, no longer just a passenger denied entry, but now the man steering the fate of the airline itself. There was no time for delay. Within days of the acquisition, Darius called for a press conference held in the gleaming conference hall of Skyline Air's headquarters, where glass walls reflected the city skyline like a mirror of change. Cameras flashed and reporters murmured as Darius took the podium, his calm presence commanding the room. "This incident was not just a personal affront," Darius began, his voice steady yet charged with purpose. "It was a symptom of a far deeper problem, one of prejudice, exclusion, and outdated practices that have no place in today's world." His eyes scanned the crowd, meeting the gazes of journalists hungry for truth. "Skyline Air will no longer tolerate discrimination in any form. We are committed to transforming this company into a beacon of diversity, inclusion, and respect." Behind him stood Malik Rivers, Darius's trusted legal advisor turned newly appointed head of compliance and ethics. Malik's expression was firm, his jaw clenched with determination. He had been tasked with the critical job of overseeing the overhaul of policies that would protect passengers and employees alike. "Our first steps are clear," Malik stated in a follow-up briefing with the press. "Any employee found guilty of discriminatory behavior will face immediate consequences. This is non-negotiable." The words echoed with authority and resolve. Meanwhile, the internal turmoil within Skyline Air churned beneath the surface. Trevor, the gate agent whose bias had sparked the entire ordeal, was placed on indefinite leave pending investigation. But Trevor was only the tip of the iceberg. Whispers and leaks from within the company revealed a disturbing truth. The culture of discrimination was entrenched at multiple levels, reaching into senior management and even the boardroom. Resistance simmered among some executives who had long resisted calls for change, clinging to outdated traditions and power structures. Darius was undeterred. He moved through these obstacles with a blend of strategic finesse and quiet intimidation. In one tense meeting with several senior executives, he leaned forward, his gaze sharp as a knife. "Change is not optional," he said calmly, voice low but unwavering. "This company either adapts or it falls behind. I'm here to lead that change." The room was thick with tension, but none dared challenge his resolve. He knew these battles were won not just in boardrooms but through steady, relentless pressure. At the same time, Darius's team began revamping employee training programs. Workshops on unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and customer rights became mandatory, weaving a new fabric of respect into the company's DNA. Malik worked closely with human resources, redesigning hiring and promotion policies to ensure diversity was not just encouraged, but enforced. "This is a long road," Malik admitted in a private conversation with Darius, his tone serious. "But it's one we must travel if Skyline Air is to survive and thrive." Public opinion, initially skeptical, began to shift. Passengers noticed changes in the way staff treated them, in the new language used by the airline's official communications, and in the transparency of company policies. Slowly but surely, Skyline Air's reputation rebounded, transforming from a symbol of elitism and exclusion to one of progress and hope. Yet beneath this transformation lurked deeper challenges. Darius had uncovered emails and internal memos hinting at a clandestine alliance between some board members and a shadowy private security firm, Valor Watch, known for aggressive and sometimes questionable tactics. The full extent of this network was still unknown, but the foreshadowing was clear. Darius's fight for justice was far from over. The stakes had grown exponentially, and the path ahead was fraught with danger. But for now, in this moment of victory and upheaval, Darius allowed himself a brief pause. Standing in his office overlooking the runways below, he fingered the silver chain around his neck, the same chain that had once been a source of scorn and denial. It now felt heavier with meaning, a symbol not of bondage but of power reclaimed. In breaking the chains that bound him, Darius freed an entire sky to soar. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional, created to highlight issues of discrimination and the power of resilience and leadership. Its purpose is to raise awareness, promote empathy, and inspire conversations about equality, justice, and accountability in business.